Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our native ancestors' stories and history alive while also sharing with you our native cultures, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And stay tuned for the end of each episode where we'll talk about some great ways to support Native causes and or Native-owned businesses. Let's get started. Hi, y'all. Rachel here. I've been taking my studio on the road this week all over Oklahoma, and we faced some technical difficulties for a few of these episodes. So please bear with us. The recordings aren't perfect, but hope you'll still enjoy. And thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Take care. Have you heard the nonfiction book about the murders of the Osage people, Killers of the Flower Moon? I'm reading it for the second time right now. Well, Martin Scorsese is directing and producing a movie based on the book, and then Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro and a wonderful cast of Native Americans that we'll talk about later will be starring in it. And my guest today had a role in the movie too, so I can't wait to introduce you in just a bit. But first, a word from our sponsor.
The Choctaw Nation has always provided a foundation upon which a future can be built. From our home in southeast Oklahoma to a bingo hall that grew to be one of the largest casinos in the world. Today's summer school programs lay the groundwork for a love of learning. Small business programs support local economies. And with over 10,000 jobs created, Choctaw offers financial stability to tribal members and our neighbors. Together we build success, because together we're more.
Because this true story took place in Osage County in Oklahoma, the filming is actually happening there. For the love of God, I am so glad the movie is being filmed in Oklahoma. So many movies about Native Americans are filmed in the strangest places. Like, there's nothing like watching a movie about Plains natives and there's California palm trees in the background. And if you've ever visited Oklahoma, you'd know there's beautiful prairie, there's rolling hills with trees, desert mountains, and red canyons. So it's about time. I've really enjoyed seeing my friends' posts on Facebook as extras in the movies. I love those sneak peeks of what is to come. And I hear the film will most likely premiere in 2022, so please be sure to keep an eye out for it. Side note, as thrilled as I am that the movie is coming out, and especially that it's set in my home state, I still have to pause to let it sink in that this movie brings awareness around just one horrid example of many just despicable things that happen to our Indigenous people. It's mortifying, it's heartbreaking, and I hope we'll all come away with the feeling of paying our respects to those who came before us after we've watched the movie. My guest today is loved by everyone he meets. He's a listener, a storyteller, and he truly cares about the folks he meets, and he genuinely wants to know their stories. He's a light in an unsure world. Dear listeners, please meet Mike Mushulatubbe Simpson, and Mike, please meet our listeners.
It's good to be here. I'm so proud that you took the time to come see us.
Awesome. Oh, and by the way, we are in the Choctaw Casino and Resort here in Durant, Oklahoma today. So we're really excited to have a chance to, patron the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma today. So now you have some exciting news about your own involvement in the movie, correct?
Yes, it was. I'm very proud to say that I was in that movie as an extra and in multiple roles. It was a fun experience. I enjoyed nearly every moment of it. We start with wardrobe in the morning, which would be somewhere around 5:30 in the morning for our call. And then they gave everyone a tag, a number, so that we could be identified. So I had a fedora hat and three-piece wool suit. I was anywhere in the movie where a well-to-do man was needed. Every person had a tag or multiple tags. So some people were reporters for the train, nurses, Salvation Army people, young soldiers, Boy Scouts, vagabonds, children, cowboys, and well-to-do and not so well-to-do Osage women and men. At one point, there were 392 extras on the set.
Wow.
That was huge.
Mm-hmm.
We had to get up really early that morning to get there. It was run like a well-oiled machine. Scorsese, the director, was at the top of that machine. Then below him was Adam. I don't remember his last name, but he was Australian. It was always make this and make that. And he was always asking. He didn't demand. And I liked that about him. They had more energy than you can even imagine. I'd like to have what they were drinking. They were running up and down the set all the time. And when I say running, it was at a very fast-paced walk or a trot. They didn't want you standing around either, especially if you're an extra. You had to have motion. It had to be moving from this place or that place. And so usually they would assign you those types of things. They always wanted action. First command, though, on the movie set was mask off, because they had to go through the protocol of making sure that the pandemic wasn't spread. If they had one person that came down with the pandemic, they would have to close down the whole shot.
Oh, my goodness. And did that happen at all?
No, it didn't.
Whew, thank goodness.
In fact, every day they would send us out a wellness report. I still receive them. They're not going to cut you off until the movie's over with, probably.
Wow.
But every morning early, we received a wellness report, and you had like 4 questions to answer. And then you just hit at the bottom, and then it'd clear you for the rest of the way. And then every now and then they would even have spontaneous type come in early and have a check. So our nose got swabbed a lot. It's talking about moving. The moving part, we had cues. We had once they did the mask off, ready, background, action, then we had cues to do what we were supposed to do. They'd tell us, okay, you're supposed to walk here and you're supposed to walk there. If you get to that point and we're still going, turn around and walk back the same way.
And I mean, all those little pieces add up to something big. I mean, everybody has to be in their place. And
yes, there's a starting point for everybody.
Right. Wow.
There was a guy that I ran around with a lot. I met at the hotel. We were staying in Ponca City. And he and his brother, Andy and Jeff, they were very involved. And Andy had actually been in Dances with the Wolves. Andy and I actually started doing some of our own cueing, because sometimes with 392 people, you just kind of got left out. So we just went ahead and did what we wanted to do.
Well, and
anyway.
I mean, you're a pro. You've done this before, right? I mean,
yes.
This is not your first rodeo or your first movie.
That's right. Yeah, we'd even gather our own props at different times. One time we were outside the bank, and it was in the Osage lineup to get their headright checks. I had kind of formed my own cue. I told this little lady that was standing behind me. I had a lady in front of me and a lady behind me. And there's a sweet little lady, gray-haired lady, that was behind me. I'd already told her that what we're going to do is whenever the cameras start coming through here, they're going to make a turn and go right down the middle of us. And when they do that, I'm going to reach down and take your hand and help you up from the street onto the curb. And there was a guy that I'll mention a little bit later, and his name was not John, but Dom. But that's another story too. But John had kind of put me in this particular position. And whenever I got through shooting that particular scene, whenever he saw it, because he didn't tell me what to do, I just added it on my own. When I looked over at Dom, he was sitting over there in a crate, and he looked at me and gave me a wink and gave me a thumbs up, like, I like that.
Way to go.
Yeah.
I was like, this guy is a pro. Now, when you were on set and everybody was in character and in their costumes and all that, did you just feel like you were transported to another time? Like you'd stepped through a time machine? And
it did feel that way. It actually did. I mean, from the very first time you put on your outfit, your clothing, it feels like you've stepped completely back in another generation.
Wow.
To the time of your grandfather.
Right.
To the time of your grandfather. I was telling you a story about Gary a while ago.
Yeah.
About Dom and John. Gary came up to me, and that's what his name. He came up to me, and Dom goes along, and he says, take off your mask. Good. Now I want you for this shot over here, Gary. And I looked at him, I said, Mike. And he said, oh, hey. He did a double take. Okay, Mike. Well, there's another guy on the set that looks just like you, and his name is Gary. And I said, okay. He said, well, so stay close, Mike. And I looked at him and I said, Gary. Then he did a double take on me. But the one thing about it was fun about that was he remembered who I was after that, because the next time that he called me out, he didn't call out Gary. He didn't call out Mike. He called out Mike Simpson. Okay, Mike Simpson, we want you to do this.
Awesome. Hey, they remember you
Yeah.
now. Maybe they're like, there's that troublemaker.
Yeah.
Cool story, though. I mean, they remember your name. I mean, when there's 392 extras,
Sure.
It's easy to get lost in the crowd. So,
Well, I've always told my kids and other kids, do something that makes people remember who you are.
yeah, absolutely. Well, so how did you come to play a role in the movie?
I went through Fraunhofer Casting out of Norman. They got in touch with me, and I was on their particular talent list. This was the first week in March in 2020 when I first heard about it. My cousin and I went to Oklahoma City for just an audition type thing. Then the shuffle of the COVID came around, and we just thought that everything had just kind of disappeared. We just went off the map. We thought, well, maybe they're not even going to have that movie, or we didn't make it,
Right.
So we were lost.
And yet they did call you back, and turns out it was really a thing, and you were going to be in the movie. It's exciting.
It was exciting.
Well, and for me too, because I read the book years ago, Killers of the Flower Moon,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had heard not too long after that, or somewhere in that time frame, that Leonardo DiCaprio, and I may have had my facts wrong, but something about how he was going to try to make the movie out of the book. And so my husband and I kept looking for it to come out, and it's like, it's never coming out. And then we kept hearing rumors of it starting to film but not film, and then COVID happened. So same with me. I thought, well, they're never going to make that movie. So you were kind of going through the same thing, I guess.
Well, everybody's lives were in hold for a while, weren't they?
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we kind of just want to forget that whole
I know.
year.
I know.
Except we can't, because we all gained weight. So it's a daily reminder. So I'm looking forward to learning more in just a bit about the movie, and more from your side of the great stories you had from the making of the movie. But I wanted to back up just a little bit and learn more about your world. What tribe are you from, and in what city were you born?
Well, Rachel, I was born in Hugo, Oklahoma, and my dad was a full-blood Choctaw. My mom was Irish and English. And when I was little, I remember sitting on my grandpa's porch, and his name was John Simpson. He was really older by that time. And I asked him what my Indian name was. He looked down at me and said, "Warrior crawls on belly." And I thought, well, that's my name. And as it turned out, later on, I found it wasn't my name, it was our family name. When the Choctaws came from Mississippi in between 1828 and 1832, they were given names in cases when the English-speaking people could not understand or pronounce their names. They were given English names. In Mississippi, when they came over to Oklahoma, some even changed their names. And in my particular case, they asked my grandfather what his name was. And I say grandfather, it would have been my great-great-grandfather. He asked him what his name was, and he couldn't speak English. And the people behind him said that in Mississippi, they called him Simpson's man, because he worked for a blacksmith in Mississippi by the name of Simpson.
Oh.
So when I talk with students, sometimes I'll tell them this story, and they'll sit there in awe about it a little bit, and I'll talk to them about it, and then I'll say, I know how I got my name. Do you know how you got your name?
I mean, that's rare. Most people don't. They don't
really
know that.
don't know.
Yeah.
My grandfather was born in 1883 in Carthage, Mississippi. We're kind of unsure about that because sometimes the people would actually go back to Mississippi to where they were from and have their children. And then if you go to this area around Carthage, Mississippi, that's where they had some that were called, just the Choctaws from Mississippi Choctaws.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that if he was a Mississippi Choctaw and then he came here and got their land, or if they came here and then they went back to have a baby.
Yeah, because 1883 was long after the removal.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. He stayed and could have actually just stayed there in Mississippi as it worked out,
Mm-hmm.
Mushulatubbe, if you look up Mushulatubbe, was a chief. And if you Google it, it comes out to determine to kill. So if you find it that way, and then if you look up, sometimes you look up the name Mushulatubbe and it will say lie down to kill. And so if you look at the translations, they could have been either way in that case. Lie down to kill could have possibly meant either one of them, just depending on what translation you had for it.
Interesting.
As far as my background goes, my dad grew up being a coach for us. He wasn't a teacher, but he coached baseball, coached American Legion baseball, and back in the day, Sandlot baseball. And so we grew up on the baseball diamonds, my brother and I did. We got our coaching from him, and then we both became coaches ultimately too. My brother's pretty well known in Oklahoma. He's in 3 different Hall of Fames in Oklahoma for his key coaching abilities.
That's great.
And his name is Alan. I'm proud of him.
All right.
Then I coached and I played football on the last football team at Murray State College in Tishomingo. They have T-shirts over there that say undefeated since 1966.
Woohoo. You had a hand in that.
Yeah, I did. Then my first job was teaching school at Valiant, Oklahoma, and then I left there after a year and taught school at Riverside Indian School.
And my dad actually taught at Riverside as well. So
and
it's
I
funny.
knew your dad, Keith, very well.
So
We talked
funny.
about that. We shared stories about him.
And then what did you teach at Riverside?
I taught history.
Okay.
You know, most coaches teach history. If you really look back on your time, you can think about a lot of them. They didn't teach math or they didn't teach science.
Right. Like, I'll take history.
I'll take history.
So at Riverside, did you actually teach Native American history in a greater degree than you would get maybe in the public schools?
You know, you go along with the books. And that's still going on today. It's just like this right here. This story is not in any history books as far as Oklahoma history goes. And that's where it should be. Yeah. And it should be at least a footnote in U.S. history.
All right. Well, Mike, let's see. Then after you taught at Riverside, you went into life insurance business, right?
Yeah. I worked for the New York Life for about 15 years. After I got out of that a little bit, then I went into selling janitorial supplies at a company out of Ada. Okay. Presently reside in Durant, Oklahoma, right here where we are. Most recently, as you know, I was just one of the extra guys. And I don't know why I said just. I've been taught a long time ago, never use the word just.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great opportunity that you had. And you played multiple parts. You were on set a lot.
A lot.
It's really
we were on
exciting.
set a lot. It was fun. It was enjoyable.
Great. And are you still filming now?
No. And I had to get out a little bit early because I had trouble with my feet.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got out a little bit early.
It's all that basketball coaching.
Yeah.
Something I've loved about the production of this movie is that they actually use natives from the area and even from afar, correct?
Yes. That was the fun part to me of the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Is getting together, because I hadn't really been together with natives to that extent. You know, we have Choctaws here and there are functions and things that go on, but it's not like it was, say, like at Riverside. And all of a sudden, everything flipped back on me. It was like I was at Riverside again. Wow. And we were playing jokes, and Indian humor is just different than any other humor.
Yes, it is, actually. It's very different.
It's very different. It's very different.
It's a lot of cutting up,
and
right?
It is, and it carries on. It doesn't end at the joke at the time, whatever it was. And I'm talking about not a joke, but just something funny that was said. But it carries on. And I mean, like, the next day, it might even come back up again. And
still going.
Oh, yeah, it's still going. And then missing the people going, A.
Yeah. When I moved away from Oklahoma and would try to say A, people looked at me so weird.
And being with those people, because if you really think about it, and I've thought about this for a long time when your dad and I were teaching there, which was in the 1970s. 100 years before that, which is not very long. In fact, it seems shorter every year for me. But 100 years before that, those people's grandparents were riding wild. The kids that we had there, their grandparents or great-grandparents, were running wild on the ponies right through Anadarko. Yeah, well, I don't know if they were chasing buffalo at that time because they were probably all gone from down here. But, you know, they were still just riding horses, just like they did, like you'd see in a movie. And
there's tons of pictures in Anadarko of the natives riding around Anadarko before it was a city and all that stuff, because there were, you know, a lot of people taking pictures down there when they were trying to settle the area more. And also Riverside has even come a long way. I know that just like a lot of boarding schools, it wasn't always the easiest place to be, and kids had been ripped from their homes to be placed in a lot of those boarding schools. But look at Riverside today and look at what the good things they're doing to try to keep the language alive and really, you know, teach a lot of these kids their culture, whether they knew it coming from a reservation or maybe they were living in more urban areas, and then they come to Riverside and now all of a sudden they get to be around other natives and learn their culture and their language. And it's something I really am trying to share with people, because I think with all the news lately about the bodies they're finding at the boarding schools, especially in Canada recently, I think the good boarding schools of today that are being run by natives for natives are really getting a bad rap too. And we need to make sure folks really get the real word on what's happening.
One of the actresses in the movie, and we'll talk about her in a little bit, is Lily Gladstone. And she's a huge advocate of what you're talking about. Cool. I've started following her on Instagram, and as I told you, I love her hard already. Yeah. You crossed over the Ouachita a lot going to out to Riverside. Mm-hmm. Did you know that Ouachita was, I always thought it was probably a Kiowa name, but it's a word, but it's actually a Choctaw word.
Is it really?
It's a Choctaw word. it means big hunt.
Oh.
And that's one of these days I've instructed my children that I will be, when I'm cremated, to be put into the Ouachita River, because big hunt. What's a better choice of going to going to the big hunt?
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Man, you're going to get us all teary-eyed.
I know. It doesn't take us long.
I know. Well, so that's great. I love the story of so many tribes coming together to make this movie. I mean, how often will something like this happen in our lifetime? So before we go any further, I don't want to give away too much information or too many spoilers about the true story of the Osage murders, but I'll tell just a bit. So in Osage County in Oklahoma, in the 1920s, there was a time frame deemed the Reign of Terror. This was during the oil boom, and with the land allotments given to the Osage, 1.5 million acres in northeast Oklahoma, the Osage lucked out and became prosperous with their heck of a rich mineral rights. So then the tribe would distribute royalties from the profit to each Osage allottee. This was called a head right, which is a word that Mike used earlier. Where things went wrong is head rights could be passed on through inheritance, and therefore white folks were marrying Osage allottees just for the money and inheritance from those royalties. Now, when I'm telling you the royalties made the Osage rich, it was reported that each Osage had approximately 11 cars. They had servants, many times white servants, chauffeurs, and mansions. So again, there were people out there who wanted a piece of that wealth. In the 1920s, the Osage Reservation brought in $27 million a year with their over 8,000 wells. Something that's absolutely astonishing, but was very common in that time, was that the government eventually passed a law where white people deemed as guardians could so-called protect, in quotes, the Osage with all their newfound wealth and manage their money for them because they were seen as incapable of managing it themselves. And of course, this led to the guardians receiving a fee for their services and controlling the money. And in some cases, they would allot such a small allowance that the Osage would end up in debt, borrowing from their guardians. And later, they were forced to turn in their assets to pay for their debts. There's so much more to that side of the story, such as the guardians were eventually caught and only 24 were charged but settled out of court. It's just so unjust. But let's take a break from the story, because speaking of stories, Mike, you have met such interesting people on the set. So tell us about it.
Well, it was more than just being on a movie set. It was a chance for many of us, as we just got to discussing, natives, to be able to be a part of something that happened within our state, and as well get to know each other. We had some very good folks there that I met, and I enjoyed every minute just talking with them.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. I met a woman who's Cherokee, and she had another name, but we called her Charlie because that's the way she went. She was actually a former Marine.
Cool.
And you could actually pick out Charlie because she always walked out. She was in a drill, with her shoulders back and doing everything. And I just loved her. She was a neat gal. My dad actually had lost an eye, his right eye. I never knew my dad to have two eyes. And the reason I bring that up is because Charlie had lost her left eye. Mm-hmm. And one night we were going to eat, and she says, "I'm on your right." And I go, "Oh." I said, "Have you lost an eye?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I never did know that." And I said, "My dad lost an eye, so I can understand why you're telling me where you are, so that you know that you're in vision."
Wow.
So anyway, she was a neat gal, and she has cancer, and that's the reason she lost her eye. Then there was David Echohawk. David was one fun man. I loved watching David talk. And when I say watching David talk, you actually watched his hands. He did it like the old way. Everything that he'd do, it's like if they were running, he would
make the running symbol.
And then he'd say they went, and then, use his gesture this way and that. Everything he would talk, he would use his hands, just like you would see the old Indians do.
Like the sign language.
Like a sign language, like you'd see in a movie, that how they could communicate.
That's a lost art right there, too.
And, I thought it's pretty interesting that David's last name was Echohawk, which probably is a good reason why he was called Echohawk,
You're right.
Nice
awesome.
Man. And then there was Che. Che Nichols was the fun girl on the set. She was, if you ever heard a spontaneous laugh just come out of nowhere, you knew that Che was somewhere around. But what's funny about Che was that she was Eskimo. Mm-hmm. And so they put her in it, and just because she looked the part anyway.
Right.
And so she worked out perfectly.
It's nice to see some Eskimo representation in there.
Right. So also was married to about 9 different women during the show because, you just didn't do stuff with men. One of the women I was married to was the gal that was actually, you had all kinds of occupations there. David, I was talking about a while ago, David, he's a grant writer for the Oto Missouri tribe. Mm-hmm. And all these people took off their jobs to be able to do this stuff. I mentioned a while ago, Che, the little Eskimo girl, she watches over 12 kids, grandkids and kids just, and so it was a vacation for her to be able to go up there and do this stuff. Mm-hmm. No wonder she was laughing all the time. She was the happiest person there. But there was one little lady there that I actually was married to, and she was a relative of Molly.
In the Molly book. From the story.
The story.
So she's a great-great-granddaughter or something, right?
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
We had a guy that was Arapaho, and he was from El Reno. And it was one of the funnier stories that happened in the whole thing was he came up to me, and we were at lunch, and he said, "I'm supposed to get my picture taken with you." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, well, I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, my kids were talking." And said they were talking about, "Well, do you know this man?" And he said, "Yes, I know this man. I see him. I talk to him." He said, "Well, you need to get your picture taken with him, Papa, because you just got to have your picture taken with him." They didn't ask for Leonardo. They asked for me. But that's the power.
They know talent when they see it.
That's just the power of our mass media like that. They saw my picture through person to a person to a person, and all of a sudden I was famous.
That famous guy.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I had a gal from here in Durant that got in touch with me. Her name is Sheila Kerbin, and she had a daughter that had gone to school at OSU. And she says, "There's a guy up there working there, just like you as an extra, and he's had gone to school with Ashley at OSU, and he is a vagabond, and he's got a derby hat on." And she said, "Do you know who it is?" And I said, "I think I know who it is." I said, "I haven't met him, but I think I know who he is." And she said, "Well, his name is Tom, Thom." And I said, "Well, I'll try to look him up." And so the next day, I wasn't looking him up. It just happened we crossed paths, and he's sitting there talking to another guy, and I walked up to him, and I said, "Tom?" And he turned his head and looked at me kind of shocked. And I said, "Thom?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Do I know you?" I said, "No, I don't think so." He said, "Well, how do you know my name?" And I stuck my hand on his shoulder, and I was holding him like this, and I said, "Because I'm clairvoyant." And he got a grin. I said, "Let me think. You go to school at OSU. You are a drama major." He said, "Yes, yes." And he said, "Does my mother know you?" And I said, "Is your mother single or is she married?" He said, "She's married." And I said, "Oh." And
then probably not.
And so then I said, "Well, no. Who do you know in Durant, Oklahoma?" He said, "Ashley Kerbin and Sheila Kerbin." I said, "Well, they told me to get in touch with you."
He really was like, how in the world does this man know?
It was fun.
That's great. I love all these stories. And that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you on this podcast, because again, this podcast is about our ancestors' stories, the stories of what our community is doing today and all that. And, I would see all these picture stories you'd put on pictures of you standing near this gal and talking about Che and all the good things that she's doing in her life. And so thanks for sharing those with us. And I'm sure these are going to be lifelong friends for you. Back to our story of the Osage. So all of a sudden, these wealthy Osage were starting to die very suspicious deaths. But wouldn't you know, the coroner would put out false death certificates saying some had committed suicide or had kidney disease when really a lot of them were being poisoned. There's a key person in this story named Molly, as we talked about earlier. Her great-great-granddaughter was on the set as an extra. And Molly's 3 sisters all died mysterious deaths. Again, I don't want to share too much, but I have to say I love Molly. She is one tough cookie. She and her family survived multiple attacks, poisoning, shootings, bombings, all in an effort to inherit head rights. Even though she lost her sister, she still soldiered on. "You go, Molly Burkhart." She's like, "Come after me, you greedy people. What else you got?" So much chaos surrounded these events. For instance, some white citizens tried to help the Osage, and they were even murdered, like thrown from a train and other drama. But we'll get back to that in a second. Mike, you've met the actress who will play Molly, correct? You talked about her a little earlier. Tell us more about any interactions, if any, that you had with her during the filming.
She was just seemed like such a down-to-earth person. She was, her smile is just angelic. I'm really curious about the moviegoers, that if they will see that in her.
Yeah.
What their impressions, what their impressions going to be of this girl, because when she smiled, and I knew nothing about her until afterwards, when I started finding out more information about her, of what she was really like. And it fit what I saw in her. And sometimes that doesn't fit the people. They come across as one way and they're actually another way. But I felt like she was just exactly the person that I'd seen in that.
And what was her name again?
Her name is Lily Gladstone.
Lily Gladstone. Remember that name, y'all.
Yep, she's quite a gal, I think. She's quite a gal. Oh, and then I'd already seen Leonardo DiCaprio from a distance.
Okay.
We had holding stations, and so a lot of times you'd be able to look out and see who was coming and who was going. And so Leonardo had already come and gone several different times like that. We had a scene in the book that is about the Osage having a delegation and going to Washington, D.C. This is kind of typical of that era, that a lot of tribes would, dress up, get their representatives, and they would go to Washington if they had something they want to try to get across to Washington. Mm-hmm. And so this was a scene like that. Leonardo had come out there, and we were having this scene, as I said, and I was in that particular group, and there were probably about 50 of us, and we were all kind of dressed a little bit differently. There were some that were dressed in black hats and black coats, and they were the delegates, and you'll see it in the movie.
Yeah.
And then as this shot's going on, there's a person up there in the front that's taking pictures in one of those O-box cameras, and we've gone through that a couple of times, And Leonardo walks up, and he's probably, like about 10 feet away from me, and he looks at all of the natives right there, and he just pauses a second as he looks, he scans across, and he kind of in a whisper says, "Amazing." And I thought it was amazing, because it hit me, because here we were, all of us together, we weren't all together because, a lot of people were in the scene anyway. But the point is I was glad I was in that scene.
Yeah.
Because the well-to-do man still got in somehow or another, but then you had the delegates there too. But there were about 50 of us there. They weren't all delegates, is what I'm saying.
I love that he got it. Like he saw that moment and saw when you were all standing together, and it's rare that we see that anymore, where Native Americans are together, and especially people that don't live in Oklahoma. And it sounds like he just gets it. It's a rare moment when you guys all came together to tell a story that needed to be told. And like you said, there are some people that were away from their jobs during this time to film, right?
Oh, yeah. Every one of these people had something to do.
I love that you wanted to get to know all these people that were your fellow natives, and you're out there for this great, great story that is horrible and yet educational all at the same time.
It is.
And I'm so excited that the cast of actors playing natives are truly native. I mentioned earlier how odd it is that Oklahoma is full of amazing scenery and native history. So it's baffling why more films aren't made here. Not to mention there's a plethora of films about Indians that don't use Indians. I could get totally on a soapbox about this. It's just shocking to me. Hollywood, there are still natives remaining in this country, And since I was born and raised in a town in Oklahoma that has more American Indians than anywhere in the world, I've just never understood why natives aren't allowed or asked to play native roles. I've also heard the producers worked with the Osage Nation, by the way, and even had a native liaison come in to ensure the native actors were respected and well heard. Is that correct?
That is correct. I haven't heard, but we did have some Osage that on the set that did that sort of thing, that they'd come along and make sure that you're holding your blanket right, or your blanket was tucked in, because some men wore them tucked in around their waists and things like that. Make sure that everything was up to standards what the Osages were doing.
I love that. Good. Nice and authentic. So what other native actors will be in the movie?
Well, Molly Barkert, as I said a while ago, will be played by Lily Gladstone, who is a Blackfoot Nez Perce, and she's the lead actress. Then Molly's husband, Ernest Burkhart, will be played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Ernest is also the nephew of William Bill Hale, Boo.
Oh, boo.
Boo. And he'll be played by Robert De Niro. Then of Cree and Métis is Tantoo Cardinal. And a lot of you probably maybe have heard of Tantoo Cardinal. She was in several movies. She plays Molly Burkhart's mother, Lizzie Q Cardinal.
Okay.
And she's one of the famous Indian country type players, as far as football, as far as movies go. She was in Dances with Wolves and 100 films and TV types appearances. She's a very strong actress. She was Graham Greene's wife in Dances with Wolves. That's what it was.
Over 100 films. She has a great resume.
Yeah, she's Canadian, and she's from Dan, Cree, and Métis and Nakota tribes. Then there's Molly's older sister, Anna Brown, and she'll be played by Kara Jade Myers, who's from the Wichita tribe. Then we've got Janae Collins, who plays Rita Smith, Molly's younger sister. She is a Fort Peck Anishinaabe and Sioux tribe, and also half Crow. Minnie Smith, Molly's younger sister, will be played by Jillian Dion, who is Canadian and Plains Cree and Métis descent. And finally, we have Nathaniel Arcand, also from Canada, and he's of Cree descent. There's several Indians in there. I was watching a movie the other night. One of my favorite movies is Hondo, old John Wayne movie.
Yeah.
I don't think there was one Indian in the whole scene. They had hundreds chasing John Wayne, There was a lot of Indians there, but I didn't see one single Indian, and they all had on wigs. So if you'll notice in this movie, not only are there Indians there, but they wanted to make sure they had long hair. And a lot of them had much longer hair than me. And so they were looking for the authentic look.
That's right. And I mean, those John Wayne movies, like you're talking about, they've got the red face paint on, almost orange, and then they have these terrible wigs. I was like, where did they get these wigs? And then they say how, the words that they say are not even a lot of times.
Or like in McClintock when he says, "Where's the whiskey?" Right. Now, why do we have to put that in to stereotype Indians? He's saying, "Where's the whiskey?"
Right. I know it's about time. So all those Native Americans that you just mentioned that will be in the movie, that's great. Plus, as you said, 300 plus extras that are Native, most of them Native American.
Well, it's a pretty good mix, but there's a lot of Caucasian people too, because there's all kinds of people that are doing all different things, like we said a while ago. It's just unbelievable.
So another person of interest in this story who you mentioned was a wealthy, prominent rancher and landowner named William Hale, who proclaimed himself king of the Osage Hills. When I first read Killers of the Flower Moon, it hit home a bit. My own great-grandmother, Ella, full-blood Choctaw, who died when I was 26, she experienced a similar situation to some degree. So Ella was born in 1903, and she was sold at age 3 for a couple $1,000s to her white guardian, J.D. Anderson, wealthiest landowner in Sulphur, Oklahoma. And she wasn't the only one in her family sold to Mr. Anderson. Her half-sister Mary Bell and her aunts and uncles were also sold to him in servitude. So the goal was to take their land allotments, but also to use them as basically slaves in his household. At one point, her uncle Cicero shot a gun into the house of J.D. Anderson, trying to kill him. But Mr. Anderson survived. The newspapers read, "Indian makes attempt to kill." The motivation for the shooting was Cicero was trying to retrieve his land allotments back from J.D., and of course he was seen in the town as a drunk and a troublemaker, even though he was the one who was actually wronged. I just feel some sort of similarity between William Hale and my great-grandmother's guardian, J.D. Anderson. And I know I'm keeping you guys on the edge of your seats. I won't go further into William Hale's role in this story for risk of spoilers, but I hear Robert De Niro, who played William Hale. Interesting fact, he had an injury on the set. So do you know anything about that?
Yeah, he had a kind of an accident, just took a bad step. Sometimes you do that. I wasn't there when it happened, but apparently he was stepping over something and tore his quad. So he was already planned to leave to go back to New York City and have a point right there to do something. So it worked out pretty well for him, I think. And I believe what they said was he didn't have many things that he was going to have to move around for the rest of his scene. So that's pretty good.
Well, there you go. It worked out. I guess if you have to hurt your quad, that's how to go. But wishing him a quick recovery. So back to the true story of the Osage killings. I mentioned there is so much to this story. The newly formed FBI solidified partly because of these murders. After years of corrupt law enforcement, judges, coroners, and more, the FBI stood against the old Wild West form of justice that had been prevalent in certain parts of the country at that time. And speaking of Wild West, my mom and sister were visiting Pawhuska, Oklahoma the other day, since my mom lives not too far from there, so they could see how it had been turned back into a western town. And the streets were filled with dirt again, and it looked like 1920s Oklahoma. And I'm actually going there this week to hang out in Pawhuska, so I'm really excited to see it for myself. So, Mike, I'd love to hear more about your time on the set and how it probably looked like you had, again, taken a ride in a time machine. So do tell.
Well, it was like a time machine with all the authenticity. They came into Pawhuska and just put a facelift on it, put storefronts and built buildings in spaces so that it looked just exactly like, and actually they made Pawhuska look like Fairfax because the story is around Fairfax and not Pawhuska.
Okay.
And the reason, and I drove over to Fairfax one day just to see what it looked like. And Fairfax has really wide streets. And so I was talking with someone there about that, and they said the reason they didn't use Fairfax is because the streets were so wide that they couldn't get the cameras because it was too
they
wide for
needed
the
both views of each side of the street.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so then they brought in, just like you would like a professional rodeo event type thing, and brought in dirt and put it on the surface of the concrete, and they went from there.
I wonder what the stores are doing there. Did they just close down during this time, or?
I'm sure they're getting paid plenty.
They're like, go ahead,
shoot another year.
That's exciting. Anything else you can think of about the sets or the shooting? The set.
One of the things that I always find funny is because a lot of times we would be filming and start off one scene and start it at 2 or 3 o'clock and not finish it up until 7 o'clock, or almost 8 o'clock. And it's going to be interesting to see how they handle those shadows of the sun and how it varies. So this is a little tip for you guys as you're watching a movie. Look for the shadows. And then a lot of times we would have, one of those Oklahoma thunderstorms that came through and dump a bunch of water on that dirt that was out there on the ground.
People from Hollywood are like, what is this?
Yeah. So at some point you're going to cross and watching the movie and you'll see it and it'll be just dry. Yeah. And then just be looking to see if there's going to be some wet mud puddles around and you'll think, well, that changed.
Wait a minute.
That's not the way it was before.
Oh, I'll be keeping my eagle eye on that.
And you know what? The thing that's really good, that the things behind the scene that everybody really never gets to see, the people that you and I've discussed about makeup and wardrobe. I mean, it's one of those things that you have to get there at 5:30. It sounds neat and romantic, but I'd have to get up at 4 o'clock to get there at 5:30. They want you to almost be ready by 5:30. Wow. Is what I'm saying. And so you had to go through, get your hair done and have your makeup. Before you did that, you went through wardrobe. Then you came back out and you had a guy by the name of Joe. He was the head wardrobe guy. And Joe would walk down the line and check everybody out to see if everybody was just exactly the way they were supposed to. And then you could move on. And he'd do this with the next group, and they'd move on, and the next group, and they'd move on. We would all get there on the set, and we'd all be ready. And we called Leonardo number one. And then everybody would, in particular the Indians, they would say, well, we ready. Where's number one? Where's number one? You can't have a movie like that without having those people. You have people that are cooks.
Right, absolutely.
And they have 2 sets of cooks. This one's for the crew, and this one's for the extras. And then there's another one for the stars somewhere,
Right, right.
But they fed us really well. And
nice.
it just managed to be able to do that, to feed that many people, at one time. Like I said, there's almost like 400.
Members. Oh, my gosh.
Probably the largest bunch was that 392 that we had. There probably was not a bigger amount than that right there.
A lot of mouths to feed. I heard the other day that one of the kitchens caught on fire.
I heard that too.
Oh, my goodness. But nobody was hurt.
Yeah, that's what I heard too.
All as well. I mean, it's all these things that you probably never would know happens on the back end.
When you pull in, you start, because you pull into parking, and you have to have people at the gate there that when you pull into park, they're checking different things like your test for the COVID, that type of stuff there. Then you check in again, and then there's people checking you in. And like I said a while ago, there's wardrobe, and then there's all the other people. Mm-hmm. And these same people will go out on the set in particular the people that are the makeup and the hair, so that they'll check to make sure, and they'll blob you and put more makeup on or whatever else like that, and or fix your hair, and it's just an army, and it's amazing just to watch how this all works, how it's all put together. And it fits, and it's amazing. It really is.
I can't even imagine being the coordinator for all of that. How did they do your hair in the movie? Was it 2 braids? Was it all back? It's
2 braids. Yeah, it was 2 braids. Well, I tried out for a part, and I didn't get it. And the lady, we did this virtually. You know, I went to my daughters in Tulsa, and so we did it virtually. And they were in California, so she said she liked my look anyway. And I said, "How long have you wanted to be in? Did you ever do any acting?" She said, and I said, "Senior play." And she said, "Well, how long do you want to be an actor?" And I said, "All my life." But anyway, I just enjoyed it. It's fulfilling to those people that like to do that sort of thing, to be a part of it. And a lot of this I do actually for my own grandchildren and their children, that sort of stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, because you can look back and say,
exactly.
"Look at that movie.
My grandpa.
There's your papa."
That's so cool.
Yeah, how many people can say that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What a great legacy you're leaving behind. It's such a wonderful story of folks coming together to bring these events to light so that we can learn and better understand what the Osage experienced as well. Congress in 1925 passed a law which then prohibited non-Osage from being given head rights from Osage who have more than half Osage blood. But unfortunately, it was too little too late, and the damage had been done. The murders resulted in a scattering of the tribe. Many Osage were terrified to stay in the area. So for those of you who haven't already read the book, who was responsible for 25 to possibly hundreds of the Osage murders? You'll have to read the book or watch the movie to find out. And if you do, write to me on Facebook or Instagram. I want to know what you think. That's Native Choctaw on Facebook and on Instagram. I'll leave you with this, my dear listeners. In 1928, a chief of the Osage said, "Someday this oil will go and there will be no more fat checks every month from the Great White Father. There'll be no fine motor cars and new clothes. Then I know my people will be happier." There must be a lesson for all of us in there, Mike. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for sharing about your experience on the set. And I'll be sure to look for you when I watch the movie and I'll say, "Hey, I know that guy."
Well, it was my pleasure. I've really been looking forward to to get to meet you, but I've told so many people that I was going to be on a podcast because I listen to podcasts. That was we've already talked about.
Good.
So it's a coming thing, and I enjoyed being here, and I had lots of fun.
Well, just like you'll have that legacy in the movies, now you'll also have that legacy in podcasts.
That's exactly
too.
right.
High fives to you, my friend. Take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Are you looking for a new adventure? Learn to fly at Chickasha Wings.
Right here at Chickasha Wings, we teach people to fly. We've got 11 airplanes, 9 flight instructors, and about 5 mechanics. We turn out about 80 new certificates or ratings each year. And we train pilots who now fly at the major airlines. They fly for the Air Force, the FAA, for private jets. They even have a few missionary pilots. Our customers come from all over the United States. Here at Chickasha, we're able to provide lower costs, a more focused training program, and we're able to provide a higher level of customer service. My favorite thing about this business is helping people, because I see people go from not knowing anything about it to being an airline pilot. Come out here and learn to fly.
Your adventure awaits at Chickasha Wings. For more information, check out chickashawings.com. Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Simply search for Native Chalk Talk. That's Native, CHOCTALK. And check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.